Everyone here with questions and answers from our technical experts and you, the audience. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly introduce our next four speakers, and they'll come up, and we'll get the second portion of the day started. First, I'm going to introduce David Palomino. David was with the Live Well San Diego support team, where he leads a data team as well as promotes the Live Well vision throughout the county through trainings and talks. Then we have Rob Eford, and he's a planning manager in the Advanced Planning Division of Planning and Development Services. Robert's team maintains updates, reports on the general plan through community plan updates, property-specific requests, general plan development tracking, biannual general plan consistency reviews, and annual general plan reporting to state. Then we have Ross Martin. Ross Martin is our county GIS manager. He works predominantly with county departments and regional partners on all issues concerning GIS in San Diego County. And last but not least, we have Pat Landrum from the San Diego Association of Governments, SANDAG. And in his role as manager of data solutions, he's responsible for the acquisition, management, and delivery of all spatial and non-spatial data that supports SANDAG's transportation modeling. With that, I'm going to bring David up, and we'll get going. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So as Bill mentioned, the second half, we're going to be talking about built environments and walkability and methodologies. We also want to really emphasize that we want this to be a back and forth discussion with you. We have a lot of experts in the audience today, as well as stakeholders. And I do want to point out that we have a couple of note takers over here to my right, to your left. They're going to be taking down your questions, your comments, and the discussion points, because what you have to say really means a lot to us. We really want to hear from you. So please note that while we're providing opportunities for discussion throughout the second half of the morning, if there's something that you really want to go deep on, maybe an extended conversation, we're going to provide an extended Q&A and discussion at the end of this morning. And so if you're feeling like maybe your question or the topic that you want to bring up is going to be a long discussion, maybe leave that for the end. But again, we really want to hear from you. So we're really excited. I think we had about 150 people on the RSVP. And it's kind of funny, some of my team members, like all week, have been, hey, are you ready? Are you ready? I'm like, yeah. And then just yesterday, our communications team says, oh, by the way, your portion is going to be on Facebook Live. Okay. And then they proceeded to read to me what sounded like my Miranda rights. You know, that anything you do or say will be recorded for time immemorial on the internet. So I'm like, and there's the camera right there, so that's not working at all. So, all right. All right, so to recap some of the benefits mentioned earlier, having adequate community space and good built environments and good walkability pays dividends for one's own health and for the health and well-being of our communities. As Supervisor Gaspar mentioned, when communities have good built environments and walkability, it leads to the rates go down. As family members do errands on foot or on bicycle. Kids do better in school because fit kids tend to do better in school. Crime decreases as community members kind of reclaim their neighborhoods and their communities. And then home values are resilient even during economic downturns. So we could quite literally spend all day on the benefits of built environments and walkability, but I'd be kind of preaching to the choir here because a lot of you know and are aware of those benefits. But ultimately, why are we here, right? We've all probably seen the saying here, the healthy choice versus the easy choice, right? And oftentimes there's that dichotomy. I could do the healthy choice, or I could do the easy choice, which is like getting in my car. And for people who want to change this, we want to change that versus to is. The healthy choice is the easy choice. Let's take that a step further, right? How about we make it the default? The healthy choice is the default. What am I talking about here? I know that with my family, one of my dreams and my goals for my family and for my community is that our modus operandi is to either, whether we're running errands or going to church or synagogue or going to the beach or whatever it is that we're doing, that we're going on foot, or walking there, or we're getting on our bikes. And that if we really have to, we'd have to think about getting in our cars because that's kind of an odd thing. And that'd be a nice change. I'd like to see that, especially in my daughter's lifetime. So how do we do this? How do we make this happen? Well, part of making this a reality is doing what we're doing right now. And that is meeting together. We have the goal of creating a common data set of built environments and walkability scores that's going to be valuable, not only for the county, but for everybody, for all the municipalities, for all of the nonprofits and environmental groups out there, and engaged citizens, something that everybody in the county of San Diego can use. And so you'll hear me kind of emphasize this, especially a little bit later on, that for this to be really valuable, for this to be something that everybody uses, we all need to partake in building out this data set. All right, so before we go any further, when we talk about community spaces, built environments, those are kind of big words, right? What is it that we really need? And so we came up with a definition here. Quite simply, a built environment is any open space or built structure that encourages the public to get out of their cars and engage in physical and healthy physical activity, right? This is a broad definition, and we chose this as a broad definition because community spaces, for the most part, is going to look different across our varied landscapes, right? So a community space in rural San Diego might look different, or might not be considered a community space in a rural, in an urban setting. So what I want to do next here is kind of show some three cool examples of community spaces, and a couple of these would not, you wouldn't really think of as a community space when we first hear about it. But by the way, I'm just going to share three of these, and if anyone in the room knows these three examples, I'll personally give you bragging rights, and you can go forth and brag to your friends. I know these community spaces. But this first one is in the west side of Manhattan, New York City. This is an old, dilapidated, well, it used to be a dilapidated rail line. And during the 70s, 80s, and going into the 90s, this is a real hotbed for drug dealing, particularly heroin. Right? And so you can imagine that the communities around this rail line were suffering as a result. But some community members got together in the mid-90s, and they kind of noticed something really weird about that was happening. Nature was overtaking this rail line, right? Weeds were starting to grow through the cracks, and it really started to look in disarray, but they thought, hey, why don't we work with nature and start planting some nice trees, some flowers. Let's make this an architectural dream, right? This nice walkway that goes from the north part of the west side of Manhattan down to the south. And so you look at this one picture right up here, it's a nice couple walking along, you wouldn't think, oh, they're right in the middle of the west side of Manhattan, right? But they are. Here's another shot of this old rail line, and here's another shot right here. So you can see that in different parts it looks different, it's varied, it's a good place to walk or commute, or maybe just take a break from college courses or whatever it is. Does anybody know this park, the name of this park? Got a couple of hands. Yes? Highline Park, yep, you got it. So, all right, so I got a few of those. All right, so you got two more to go before I endow you with bragging rights. So, all right. So this next one is considered the birthplace of landscape architecture. The landscape architects, instead of moving mountains and hills, they wanted to go with the natural topography of this area and go with the natural foliage and maybe add some more trees, maybe some couple of structures here, creating some ponds. Community members in here, this happens to be in Massachusetts, you love to go here to go on bike rides, to go on picnics, or just to hang out and get away from the everyday life. Does anybody have an idea of what this place is called? No? Oh, yes.
Is it Mount Auburn Cemetery?
Yes. Oh, very good, good. Yeah, you wouldn't believe it. You're looking at a cemetery, Mount Auburn Cemetery. I mean, how many of you guys hang out in cemeteries? I know, but I mean, but this is a great, place, and kind of thinking outside that box, going, hey, let's take something that kind of sounds a little morbid, but let's make it beautiful for the living as well. All right, so this next example, so community spaces and access and close access to community spaces is nothing new. That's not a new concept. It goes back to colonial times. And in this is you can see a bunch of houses and neighborhoods, right? Blocks and blocks of houses. And if you look closely, there's no less than 15 community parks throughout this town. And so no matter where you live, if you walk in any direction, you're probably going to encounter nature or a green space in some form. And if that wasn't good enough, kind of throughout the town and around the town, there's these nice tree-lined walkways. So what a great plan. Anybody know what this city or town is? Savannah, Georgia, yes. Okay, so if you and this nice lady here and you guys get together collectively, you've got bragging rights. Right? So there you go forth and brag. All right, so what are some examples of community spaces in your neighborhoods or in your communities that maybe people from your communities might not think of as a community space? Are there any examples out there? It doesn't have to be odd, but just what are some examples, just to see what the variety of community spaces that are represented in this room. I know Ross Martin has one.
Yeah.
Ross, you want to...
Active use park.
What's that?
An active use park.
Oh, come on.
A library.
All right, so Ross and I were having this discussion, and he's not complying right now. No, but there's this, near Ross's place, there's this bridge.
It's a bridge.
Right? Who would think that a bridge would be a community space? Not me. I mean, but near Ross's place, there's this bridge that people love to go to, and they walk, and it's like, okay, this is not our traditional definition of a community space, but people go there, and they're getting out of their cars, and they're walking back and forth on this bridge. How cool is that? So any other examples that we might have in this room? Canyon?
Switzer Canyon.
Okay, so like what, hiking trails or what? Trail?
Walking, hiking,
Yeah, awesome. Anybody else? Yes?
What about the waterfront park?
The waterfront park? Yeah. I mean, that's a prime example of, right? I love that example too, because a few years ago that was a big parking lot. And then the county did something right.
On Facebook.
Today, tomorrow, Friday.
Facebook Live.
Live on Facebook. Wow, I really got my foot. So, but taking that parking lot, putting it underground, and putting a waterfront park with lots of green spaces out there, what a wonderful thing. That was genius, right? We did a lot of genius things here. Yes? Plaza de Panama. Do you want to elaborate about that?
Now there's tables and umbrellas and pillows and there's no cars and yay.
Yeah. And what was there before?
Parking lot.
Yeah, cars. Yeah. I mean, Balboa Park. Remember that right in front of the one of the museums there. I forgot what was the name of the museum. Modern Art. I mean, a lot of cars used to drive through there, and now it's a walkway. I mean, those are things done right. Okay. All right. So as we can see, community spaces can vary, right? Rob Eford is here to talk about the character of built environments and how that influences community spaces. So, Rob, you need to clap for Rob.
All right, good morning, everyone. Okay, so what we want to focus on next is the spatial aspect of planning for community spaces and how we envision our communities, how do we integrate community spaces into those. And one thing that we want to emphasize here is that one size does not fit all. There's a wide spectrum of different types of community spaces that fit within the different contexts that occur within the county and within your individual cities. So of course we look at the urban and county example, but even within the county itself we have what we call regional categories. And so we would break the county, the unincorporated area, into things like villages, our small town centers, and then the semi-rural areas, and then the rural areas. So we want to be mindful of that. We would encourage you all to be as well. So what's important though is that these community spaces are context responsive, and that will influence the types of community spaces that we create. Now, something that is a bit of a hurdle, a self-imposed hurdle, is in traditional urban planning. Those of you that are planners are familiar with this, is that at least in America we have a tradition of segregating spaces by use. And so we tend to think of things in silos. And so we think, where do we put the houses, where do we put the shopping? And then we think of open spaces or community spaces as its own thing. And so what we want to do is come up with something that will integrate all of that and look at it in a holistic sense. So something that some of you may be familiar with, can I see a show of hands of who's familiar with the transect? Right, so the planner side of the room for sure. But for everyone else here, so this is the transect model that was popularized earlier in the 20th century by Andres Duany and the advent of new urbanism and form-based codes. And really what form-based codes try to do is to look at the spatial characteristic of the built environment rather than the use that I was mentioning earlier. And so what this does is it displays a full range of potential environments going from the rural side of a jurisdiction to a more urban side, and looking at what does that urban form look like, and then how do we dictate that versus the uses themselves. So the county actually has established 3 form-based codes. We have them in the village centers for Fallbrook, for Alpine, and for Ramona. And we are looking at using this where appropriate in all of our community plan updates, because we recognize some of the benefits that it provides as far as integrating the urban spaces with the open spaces and community spaces. So one thing that we want to talk about here too is that it emphasizes the continuity and the context of the urban form. And even within the form-based code itself, it has, you can have a civic district or a civic zone that even breaks down even further what types of community spaces are appropriate. So in the code itself, it'll emphasize that. So if it's a pocket park, if it's a plaza, if it's a open space trail network, all of these things are accounted for and integrated into the correct places. So we wanted to go through some examples here as we look at the urban, the suburban, and then the rural setting of what do some of these community spaces look like. So starting with rural San Diego, what you tend to see in the rural spaces is what landscape architects and open space planners would call passive recreation. Not that the activity itself is passive, but that there are less facilities. So you look at something like this, and that really is going to be some type of trail. There's going to be potentially wildlife observation, et cetera, but these are a lot of times paired with conservation goals and conservation open spaces. So then when you move to a suburban setting, you get into something that we call active transportation, but meaning mostly that there's more of a facility there, even if it's a field or it's some type of structure. But you look at some of the different parks, outdoor amphitheaters, community centers, and then you get into the urban area, and so your land area is a lot less. You may not have the space for a field, you may not have the space for some of the larger facilities, but there's still an opportunity for these community spaces where people can interact and do their shopping or meet their neighbors. So in urban San Diego, we've got a great new example down in Little Italy of the Piazza della Familia, which is a great new piazza which took the place of a road, but it fits right in with the existing character and fabric of Little Italy. And then you have, somebody mentioned a waterfront park earlier, so obviously that was a great conversion of a parking space. And then even something like Park at the Park for Petco Park as an opportunity that is part of the facility, but it also is open to the public at certain times. So just wanted to open it up real quick to you guys and hear what are some of the great examples of community spaces that you see in each of those different categories, in a rural setting, in a suburban setting, and then an urban setting. Does anyone have any really good examples here from the county? Here we go. Yeah.
In the urban setting, it's in Cortez Hill. It's called Tweet Park.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a linear park that's essentially butted up against the 5 freeway. It's pretty interesting space. It's a little loop for folks to walk around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Serve the residents there.
So for those that didn't here, Tweet Park in Cortez Hill. This was using some of the right-of-way between a roadway and the freeway. So one of the great things about urban spaces is the opportunity to reclaim underused or spaces that are used for other uses than a community space. That's absolutely a great example. Any others?
I would say in that same thing would be Terralta Park.
We're bringing you a microphone back.
Oh.
Sorry.
Usually not enough. I was going to say Terralta Park in City Heights, where they've actually captured the freeway and tried to capture that space for green space for that.
Right. So yeah, very infrastructure-heavy sense to create an urban space, but man, it sure transforms the community and helps to stitch back together what had been divided. Do we have one for Shelley over here?
Okay, it's not a park, but I spent some time at UTC Mall, and they've done a really nice job putting in play space and creating areas. They have performers come in, and so sort of somewhat unusual, maybe not that, but not a park.
Sure. So I mean, the concepts that apply there, we can apply in a lot of places, even if that happens to be a private example of some open space. So they've done a great job in the design of that and the concepts of that. So whether it's in the county's villages or in some of the urban jurisdictions, we definitely could apply those and use that as inspiration. Okay,
I would
Mark.
just like to say there's a really good example of Cholas Creek. There's like an urban farm that I recently got to visit, and that was amazing because there's over 20-something countries that are represented, and eventually it would connect all the way down the creek, all the way to Barrio Logan. So that was a really awesome experience to see how that city-owned space has turned into this huge urban farm, and now there's a huge waiting list because people are so interested in taking part in that, which is run by the IRC, the International Rescue.
No, what a great example. I mean, that brings so many different priorities together. So you've got the cultural fusion there, you've got the access to healthy foods, you've got the use of potential, I'm not sure what was there before, but an underutilized spot. So this is something that community spaces can accomplish and bring together so many of these different goals and support
There
different
was
efforts.
nothing there before.
Okay. Yeah, Howard.
One of my favorite in the county is Rancho Santa Fe's Town Green. It's off its main street with its avenue. It's a really great town center.
Right, so more formalized civic spaces as well, create a beautiful aesthetic but are also functional. Yeah, we have one back here.
The Central Library downtown San Diego.
Okay, and what specifically about that?
There's not only the library, they reinvigorated the old library, but there are a lot of community meeting spaces. There's adjoining areas for activities. I saw an outdoor chess game there one time when I visited. So I think it's a really nice reuse of a downtown area.
Sure, and so you bring up a great point too, that it doesn't have to be an outdoor space. If it's a public space that's accessible to all, libraries are great, especially for the county. We focus a lot of community services on the libraries, whether that's even access to internet. There's a lot of places in the county that don't have that type of infrastructure. So this is something, again, that has a multifaceted support of our efforts.
It's been a monumental planning effort, but the Coastal Rail Trail, I think, is a great example.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, the trails are not just in the rural areas. We want to have that connectivity, and we want to give urban dwellers an opportunity to have access within and between communities as well.
Also, I believe it's Olivewood Gardens. They have a lot of greenery. It's you have public meetings there, and they also provide cooking classes as well.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's maybe do one or two more. We have, maybe we were up. Okay, let's do this one right here.
Thank you. I'm lucky enough to belong to the team of Hollywood Gardens, so you're more than welcome to visit anytime. And it's open to the public now. Well, I'm lucky enough to live in National City, because we have a connection with Pepper Park, which is a beautiful place. We have a connectivity point, which is will be great to have it as a connection between Bonita, National City, Chula Vista, and the park specifically. The Sweetwater River is the one that has a walkability area, but it's not really established yet as a corner. We have, I'm lucky enough to belong to a Paradise Creek group, and they have activities for the kids in the creek to see migrant birds. They have birds and lights in there, but unfortunately it's bombarded with homeless and a little litter. So So that'll be a great point to preserve and do infrastructure and improvements on that area so we can connect the South Bay area because we have beautiful bays, beautiful parks in there. So that'll be nice to see a connectivity point in there.
Great. Well, thank you. And I think you actually bring up a great point as we transition to David's next section, as we talk about some of the challenges to implementing community spaces, and then even once they're implemented, the management of those spaces. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. I love the discussion there. Where are we now in terms of our data? So we currently have data for the whole county, and as you know, as Leslie mentioned, we have it at the city level and different levels of geography. But our data is currently incomplete right now, and that emphasizes or that illustrates the need for all of us to work together for this data set to be complete and to be valuable for everybody to use. And I'll show one example here. I looked at the data set, on the map, and I went into my neighborhood. I just want to see. Okay, I just want to see how this compares to the ground truth level. And I saw 4 missing trails, a missing park that my family and I like to go to, and a completely missing bike path that's down there to the south. And I know that bike path is there because I just biked on it the other day, and I was like, I know it's there. But again, this illustrates that no matter how mindful that we are when we're trying to build this out, we really need the input from everybody for this to be valuable, and so that everyone can use. And speaking of the local perspective, a few weeks ago I was in a conversation with Rebecca Balk from the Borrego Springs Community Sponsor Group. And she couldn't be here today, but I told her that I would share what she said to me and share her quote with you. I won't read the whole quote to you, but a couple of things that really stood out. One was obvious about Borrego Springs, that it's hot during the summer times, from June through October. But one of the things that she brought up that was sort of a revelation to me, as someone who lives closer to the coast, and something that I didn't think about up front, is that she says, even if we have walking paths that are connecting points of interest, whether it's a school to a library or to a community center or a pool, and unless those walking paths are shaded by trees, they're not really useful for several months out of the year. I never really thought of that, but it makes perfect sense, right? And to change this from a non-walkable or a non-community space or area to a community space in the walkable area, to simply put in trees along those walkways. And so I wanted to ask you, what are some of the challenges that you face in terms of people accessing community spaces? And it can be anything. So what are some examples that you guys have? Yes? Missing sidewalks. Yeah. I hear a phone back there. Anyway, sorry about the phone back there. And anybody else? So we talked about missing sidewalks, and actually Roswell will talk about this as well, is that you can have these great community spaces, but if you don't have the adequate walking between those 2 points, it's kind of useless. Yeah. I'm sorry.
I was going to say sometimes poor lighting.
Poor lighting?
Make you feel like you can walk there after dark or dusk.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, yes?
High volume or high speed traffic.
High volume and high speed traffic, yeah. I know in my community, there's some pretty cool places to go to, but in order to get there, you have to cross a couple of busy intersections. And those intersections are really big, they're like multi-lane intersections. Oh gosh. Yes, Shelby.
Poorly maintained trails or trails that aren't really trails. So we live near a canyon, but there's only a sort of a trail to use.
Yeah. And you're kind of walking on it, and you're kind of like.
Well, there's a ton of poison oak.
Oh, yeah, that will be a deterrent. Yes.
To follow up on what she said, just trails that don't have enough
benches or something to, you know, kind of take a break or take a break. You know, maybe you have a little one, you know. And, yeah. Yes.
I think a lot of people are talking about getting to those community spaces, but also once you're there, I know in my neighborhood there's some great ones, but events will be happening. So I plan this whole day, and then I get there, and there's a big event, and the space isn't usable. Another one.
Okay. Okay.
Awareness.
How about one or two more there?
And underutilized spaces that are sitting there. I live in Linda Vista near an elementary school that has lost alumni, lost students, and it's going to keep reducing. They have an enormous outfield. It's perfect to be a park, and instead it got used for the school leased it to the space to Mesa College for overflow parking, and they already built a parking structure. So like, no, it needs to be a community park, and the park down the street is so used that it absolutely would, you know, be a super space, but complex.
Yeah. And how about one more right here?
Something that dovetails on what she just said that I was going to wait till later, but it's parking lots. Why do parking lots have to all be above ground? Why can't something be built below ground? I was thinking about parking lots. Why can't we build some of our parking lots below ground and put parks above? It's done in a lot of cities, and it's much more successful.
Yeah, yeah. I love that idea. I mean, this is, you know, if we can build it underground, let's do that. Leave space on top for green space. Moving right to the next question right here, are there any challenges that you face in terms of accessing data to adequately assess walkability and built environments in your communities? This might be, you know, particular to the data people in the room, but is there anything that you're finding?
One of the things I would like to see, and maybe it already exists, but I don't know where, excuse me, one of the things I'd like to see, and maybe it already exists, I'd like to see overlay maps be created out of the data that we have. For instance, if you have a planning group in a neighborhood and they want to plan zoning or whatever, or they had overlay maps of where the demographics are, where the services are, that kind of thing would help them with their planning.
Okay. Yeah, and actually Pat and Ross will be able to speak to that as well, because there is a lot of that data that's available through SANDAG, and also some of the services that Ross Martin has can provide as well. So excellent. Let's go ahead and I'm going to introduce our next speaker, which is Pat Landrum. He's from SANDAG, and he's going to provide some context with SANDAG's built environments and how and how they provide the opportunity for you to take part in the built environment. So Pat.
Thank you, David. So I'm going to shift gears and try not to be too technical here and talk about some foundational data that SANDAG, through our partnership with SANDAG and many of the local jurisdictions in the region, have begun to acquire and build upon over the last several years. There we go. Sorry. Okay, and then after that, I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of Transnet grant programs that SANDAG administers that leverage funding from our half-cent regional sales tax, along with some other funding, federal funds and TDA funds, to speak to some of these issues about connectivity and creating community spaces. And then I'm going to move to an initiative or strategy that was part of our SD4 regional plan in 2015 that centers around improved mobility hubs around transit centers and other like areas.
Press forward twice.
Oh, twice. There we go. Okay, so the first one I'm going to talk about are some regional data initiatives around aerial imagery. Since 2012, SANDAG has been partnering with SANDAG. We have a memorandum of agreement with SANDAG to host a single GIS data clearinghouse in the region. How many of you either work with GIS or work with folks that actually use GIS software in your analysis or mapping activities. So pretty good, maybe about half. So one of the things that we've done over the years is look at how do we partner with other regional and local and state and federal and utility district entities in order to leverage funding across the entire region. We began this in 2012 with a smaller partnership, about 8 entities, to produce imagery across the entire region at the 1-foot resolution. In 2014, we expanded that to 28 agencies at about $1 million across all of these entities to not only acquire 4-inch in the urban area resolution imagery, which is essentially the pixel is about that big. So it gives you an idea of the resolution of the data. And then 1 foot across the rest of the region. And then in 2017, we actually expanded that even further with 31 agencies and included oblique imagery, which is a bird's eye or 45-degree view of the built environment only. That was in the urban area. So on the upper left-hand corner, you can see kind of the downtown Point Loma area, Petco Park on the lower left, and since we're here hosted by the county, I thought I'd have the COC here and downtown admin center. As part of the 2014 project, we also initiated the collection of LiDAR elevation data. In the region, we haven't had a seamless elevation, high-resolution elevation data set ever. If any of you have been historically involved in any kind of GIS activities, you'll remember the USGS Total Quad maps, which essentially were 1 to 24,000 scale maps, very low res, 10-meter digital elevation model. This is a 2.5 foot by 2.5 foot resolution across the entire region, which we began in 2014. We are partnered with, FEMA undertook an effort to do the central portion of the region in 2015. We coordinated with them to make sure they flew it at the same spec and had the same deliverables. And then SANDAG, in partnership with the County of San Diego, we were awarded a USGS 3DEP grant and leveraged that funding to complete the eastern portion. So what we have now is a seamless regional elevation data set, 2.5 foot by 2.5 foot pixel. We have all the mass points for the LiDAR, and we have 2 foot elevation contours for the entire region. A huge undertaking, couldn't have been done without all of the partnerships that we've been able to establish and maintain throughout the last several years. So one of the other derivative products in the lower right here is an urban tree canopy project that the City of San Diego undertook in coordination with the University of Vermont, which it further enhances our base data sets so that we have tree canopy now, and I believe the county is looking at doing an incorporated area through some partnership work with SDSU. So we continue to leverage and build upon these data sets as we move forward. So the next step in building this foundational set of data was the acquisition of building outlines. I heard someone mention sidewalks earlier and the lack of sidewalk data and information, gaps in sidewalks. Sidewalks was essentially the second most requested data set from a regional perspective. Buildings was first. So the good news is we have buildings for the entire region based on the 2017 imagery that we acquired. And SANDAG is undertaking an effort now to take the LiDAR data and the buildings data and take it a step further and build a regional 3D base map. After we initiate that effort, we're going to go ahead and tackle the sidewalks. So that's the next big item that is on our list from a regional perspective in terms of data acquisition. So the final piece of information I wanted to share with you is our land inventory system. SANDAG has been maintaining a land inventory data set since 1971. How many know what Esri is? Pretty much almost unanimous. SANDAG is customer number 54. We actually were, Jack Dangerman, the founder of Esri, did his grad work based on a project that was initiated with SANDAG called the PIOS system, Polygon Information Overlay System, which is now what you know as ArcGIS. So So the land inventory system historically has included dwelling units, generalized land use, and planned land use, among a number of other data sets. In the past, it was called LandCore. We have evolved that now to accommodate our data-hungry forecasting and modeling tools to take that to the next level, which is now called SpaceCore. So when I was talking about 3D buildings and building spaces, where we actually can store employment information, residential space information, Florida area ratios, and so forth. So that's really the next generation of our land inventory system, is really start talking about space. So how do you get to this data? So through that memorandum of agreement, we maintain a regional GIS data clearinghouse. Currently, there are nearly 300 layers available for download. There are nearly 16,000 registered users to that site, and it continues to expand every day. The reason we have to have registration on that site is because we publish the regional parcel data layer. That parcel data layer includes ownership information. So if you don't register for the site, you're not able to access that owner information. There's a number of reasons behind that, primarily legal, but essentially that's what requires us to have the registration. The next step for us is to actually take that regional data warehouse and take it to another level and create an open data portal that actually will leverage not only the regional GIS data warehouse data layers, but those data published as services so they can be consumed by any number of GIS applications, open source applications, as web services. It'll also have linkage to our parcel lookup tool and a number of other applications, the San Diego Regional GIS Council forum. So we look forward to doing that in the very near future. I think you'll be very pleased with how we evolve that. I can't thank Ross and Scott Dashner and Brad Lind and now Scott Cheap with Sanjis for helping to keep this up, to help prioritize the improvements that we make, and leverage the talent we have across the region. I know we're running short on time. I want to just briefly mention a site to you. I won't walk through any of the examples today, but SANDAG administers the active as part of Transnet, administers the Active Transportation Smart Growth Incentive Program grant programs. Essentially, in this application, the Transnet Story Map, you can go in and see a number of different examples of active transportation projects that support complete streets initiatives, community space initiatives. I encourage you to take a look. Many of the local jurisdictions that have successfully implemented these projects and continue to do so show an example of the types of improvements that can be made that are kind of like planting seeds, right? Some of these aren't very large projects, but they're in key areas within jurisdictions where people saw a specific need to improve or enhance accessibility or walkability or bicycle access. And so I encourage you to take a look at the Transnet Story Map. There is a link at the end of this presentation. I'd also encourage you to look at the Environmental Mitigation Program tab in this application as well. There are a number of different examples of we talked about some rural community spaces. A number of these projects are mitigation banking for some of the large capital improvement projects that SANDAG has undertaken. And a number of them are within kind of a suburban or even urban context. So I encourage you to look at these types of examples to continue to gather ideas for other improvements and apply to that grant program to compete for those valuable dollars. We just, I believe at the end of July, had our funding recommendations for the Cycle 4, the Active Transportation and Smart Growth Improvement Program. Through this Transnet Story Map, you can get to all of that information and more historical information about the grant projects, grant applications themselves, if you need to kind of use that information as a guide to create a successful grant application. The last item I'm going to share with you is kind of a fun one. As part of the SD4 regional plans I mentioned, there's a mobility hub strategy that named 8 pilot project areas to do, show an example of the types of features and accessibility type improvements, as well as what Supervisor Gaspar mentioned about the connectedness. part of it is social, but in this day and age, part of it really is technology connectedness. So a number of different elements that are part of the Mobility Hub strategy. There's a Mobility Hub's feature catalog that includes all of the different items that one might want to implement in one of these types of projects. So I'm going to let this video go and probably not say too much about it and let you have a look. So this area here, just to set the stage, these are seven specific areas around the travel sheds that is centered around Oceanside Transit Center. It shows the before and after visualization of potential improvements that might be implemented. At the bottom right on the legend shows you the types of amenities or services that are part of that Mobility Hub's feature catalog. Sandag coordinated closely with North County Transit District and the City of Oceanside on developing the information around each of these sites, including how things would look aesthetically, the types of features that would be included within each of those different community space types. And yes, we did use some of that LiDAR data and imagery and a number of other different types of data to give the consultant to help them create this visualization. Turn the music up right here. Well, with that, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Dave.
Just quickly, you mentioned that the data couldn't be accessed by everyone. You have in terms of the warehouse. You said that not everyone could access that data without special.
Yeah, so we do require a registration to the site because of the fact that the parcel ownership information is included in the parcels layer. That's the only real reason why we have that. However, we also publish a number of services in the public domain, including the parcel data as a service without the ownership information. So we have a wide range of geographic information published as web services, along with all of that imagery and elevation data.
Okay, so you have it segregated for people who don't have access.
Absolutely, yeah. And if there's a special request, we're more than happy to send it out. We can, we even have the ability to convert it to formats that folks can use, because not everyone is a GIS professional, right? Some people just need a table. Some people need a CAD file for the design work. So.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? All right, thank you. Oh, sorry, sir.
Roll out for the change. So you're updating your website portal. Do you have a date on that? Expected date?
So we're looking to first put that particular portal page up on the Sandag website, and then we need to think a little bit further about how we integrate it with the initial launch or the refinement of the regional data warehouse. We could put a link there, we could just change the page completely, because we want to make sure we have the downloads piece intact, because we don't anticipate publishing all of the data as services. That's about 300 layers, it's a lot of overhead to maintain. What we do is every 6 months we take a look at the actual downloads of the data, and we essentially have a top 25 list of layers that are by far the most downloaded, and we'll initially start with those. Most of those are already available as services, but I don't have a specific date. I'd say sometime in the next 90 days or so. Other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. That's pretty exciting to see that before and after visualization. Next, we're going to have Ross Martin, who is the GIS manager for the county, and he's going to take us through a story map and talk about the walkability scores in built environments. So, Ross?
Thank you. Okay, to begin, I like high technology and I like complicated things, but I love complicated things that are made simple or made elegant. So what I'm hoping to accomplish today is to go over something that we built, make it simple and make it accessible, because ultimately it is, and what we're talking about is access to community spaces, and we have a subtitle to it, a tale of two communities, where we examine two areas. But at its core, we're just going to examine the concept of this community spaces measurement. It's essentially a yardstick tool that we come up with so that we can determine how best to track our progress. I mean, and I ask you, here's the fundamental question: when we do anything in government, how do we know if we've accomplished our goals? And it's very difficult to measure things such as community spaces or reductions. If you have multiple factors that are contributing to them, it's hard to narrow in on what's making the benefit happen. So with clear and demonstrable benefits that go with having access, close and approximate access to community spaces, we wanted to make sure that we had this kind of yardstick that we could measure these things. So what they are, in essence, is it's a means to manage something. All right, it's a means to manage something because we can measure it. So the county's passionate about performance-driven outcomes, and we're investing a lot of time in this. And what it boils down to for the community spaces model is that it's a variety of things. It's a variety of land use types, and we're ensuring or checking that there's somewhere between 300 and 600 square feet per household. That's it at its core, within a quarter mile of those households. So it is a relatively simple approach, but what we're looking to do, and you can see over there in this map, the areas that are in green have adequate access. And the darker green they are, the better the access. And the very dark green areas that have squarish shapes or linear shapes to them, those are the actual community spaces as we have measured them. And as David indicated earlier, this is a first draft or a draft attempt, meaning that not all of our data sets are complete. We don't have every trail, we don't have every access point, we don't have every pocket park, especially within the jurisdictions. So the more information that we get, the better our access assessment gets. And right now, this is a regional map, so it covers all the way to the coast. But it could be improved significantly by adding more data to it. So let's scroll down. So let's go right into what community spaces are. In this image, this is somewhat of a, perhaps a utopian expectation, where a household touches the community space. It's not a quarter mile away. It's essentially its backyard, and it has a pool and there's waterfront access. This happens to be a place in San Marcos. Now we can strive for this, but we know that it's not necessarily a reasonable expectation to have that level of open space available to every household. So that quarter mile watershed that we're really honed in on is that distance that we expect that people will make the default choice, make the easy choice, which is walking and not using the car. As you scale out beyond that distance, you get to a half mile and a mile and somewhere beyond that, it starts to affect the number of people's their decisions as to whether or not they want to jump in the car, load the minivan, or find another reason to perhaps potentially use a car. So we want that maximum access within that watershed around those communities, around those households. And how we measure that is looking for places that facilitate recreational access. They form a network or connectivity point for those households. They need to be a bit of a destination at times, like we mentioned. There's the bridges that are near Hillcrest that attract people to just go walk across the bridge because they're beautiful. It can be Cowles Mountain in that sense that people want to walk up and down it. And it can also be part of a threaded journey so that you're perhaps going to get groceries, and on your way you can stop by the park or maybe take your dog with you as well. These are features that they will attract foot traffic, and people sometimes even drive from far away just to visit them. So in our assessment, how we measure these, how we collect them up, is we basically look for active parks, civic centers, community colleges, libraries, DPRs, Department of Parks and Recreation. So parking and staging areas that are associated with these parks. And then this is a key one, public schools that have joint use fields. Not all public schools have public access, but those that have joint use fields act as an excellent means to get people additional green space and open space access to their community. Staging areas, trailheads, and trails. So in the examination over here on the map, you can see these various community spaces. This one happens to be a community, this happens to be a school that has a joint use field. This one, also schools. Schools are significant, significant influencers when this model comes up. This happens to be an active use park. So the more of these you have, the more varied you have within the community, obviously the maximum amount of exposure you have within that quarter-mile watershed around your residents, and increase the opportunities for them to go out and recreate. So now let's examine our communities. I'm not picking on anybody in these communities. It just happened to be where there was one community had more, one community had less, or as I see it as an opportunity. So in this community, those that are familiar with that specific play structure statue, it happens to be near San Marcos. You can see there's quite a number of residents that are surrounded or in and around the areas that have a bunch of community spaces, so includes libraries, community centers, and parks, and joint use fields and trails. And so there's a great number of people that are being serviced by them. In the next community, this is community A, community B, it has access for quite a number of its residents, but then there's some gaps. I can highlight the gap right here, where there are people living here, as I circle the cursor right here in this light green area, and there is a park, but it's just not enough of a park space to really cater to the amount of people that are in that area. And I highlight this area because there's an opportunity here that happens to be what appears to be a decommissioned landfill in that gap that is just not being used. It's now a closed landfill. So what that amounts to, and I want you to engage in this sense in a thought experiment with me, which is access to community spaces isn't just the linear distance, the quarter-mile distance from the household out to the park. It's the amount of the park that is available for all of those residences. So if you could picture with me a city that had 50,000 residents in it, but it only existed in a quarter-mile circle. So you have a lot of people. It's a very urban area, a small space. If you had a park, a 1 acre park in the very center of that circle, they would technically all have access, but it would be adequate access. So clearly that ratio of the number of square foot per household would be completely inadequate, even though they're within that walking distance. So that's the core of our yardstick that we're looking at, is making sure that there's adequate community space access for all the households within that walkable distance to basically facilitate that, that parent's decision to say, hey, get on your bike and go to the park. Rather than like, okay, we'll go, let's go to the car. So, before I segue into walkability, because we're kind of alluding to walkability and why it matters, I wanted to make sure that there's any questions so far. Yes, go ahead.
How much do you take into account the quality of the open space? I think schools play a vital role in providing open space in our communities, but a lot of the joint use parks are really just fields.
Correct.
So there's not amenities. So I personally have an issue when they call them parks, because to me they're not parks. So how much do you take that into consideration with the data?
So it's a binary. We don't grade the quality of the community
question kind of relates to that. So in your data collection, is there information that you collect about the people who frequent these spaces and kind of income levels, education levels, linguistic isolation? Because I actually grew up a couple of blocks from the first example. And it's a beautiful park, and it's actually my niece's favorite park that we go to. But growing up, that park wasn't there when I was there. So, and I know that in the area there's single family homes, but there's now, you know, sometimes 2, 3 families living in each of those homes, a lot of limited backyard space. There's a lot of also liquor stores and fast food places in the area. So I can see why people, when that park came in, I could see the difference in the community and how much better it made the community. So I'm curious to know whether in your data collection you look into that, those factors.
So we did not, again, add any kind of weighting factor for socioeconomic values to a given area, because that's much more of a demographic study in terms of looking at social access and perhaps environmental equity and that type of thing, that it is to simply say, can somebody have the opportunity? Right now, we're dealing almost with a binary of there's just no place to go. So we want to get past that first hurdle, and then we can start looking at like kind of the richness of the experience. As Pat alluded to earlier, the three-dimensional environment matters greatly to us because this is simply a linear measurement around households. And as we all know, we don't walk in straight lines to go get stuff. I mean, some of us can, but not. It's more often than not the case in the urban area. You cannot travel in a straight line. And having a three-dimensional surface which you can assess the walkability of it, not just is there places to go, but can you physically pass through it? Is it full of canyons, or is there freeway barriers and that type of thing? Will matter immensely in the future to make these assessments, because sometimes you can be within a stone's throw of recreational opportunity, but there's a railway running through your backyard and you can't get to it. So, any other questions?
What's the possibility of using more of our urban canyons or parks? I see a lot of the urban canyons really are just not used.
Sure. That is a question specific to the jurisdictions and the parks departments and their budgets, ultimately.
My question, by the way, was why aren't we doing more using our urban canyons, parks?
I see it as, given the topography, and I'm a geographer by training, given the topography of San Diego, it's a wonderful opportunity. I can't argue with it. It's a great opportunity. So to that end, let me segue quickly to walkability, because I know I'm going to run out of time. So to subordinate the idea of walking to a park, or walking, or riding a bike, or jogging, finding recreational opportunities that are nearby your home. One of the things that we also wanted to assess was the walkability scores for San Diego County on a whole. And this isn't necessarily a new concept, when we zoom in here on the right. This is something that you're perhaps familiar with if you've been to any real estate site like Julia or Zillow, that they use this thing as a value called Walk Score. It's actually a commercial organization. It's owned by a company called Redfin, and it's called walkscore.com. And it's a simple ranking system that runs from 0 to 100. Well, I don't think it's possible to actually score 100. But it's a ranking system to basically break down, without getting into too much of the complexities of it, break down how walkable your neighborhood is. So where you live, if you're looking at a home, you want to purchase a home, you want to know how walkable it is. And they've broken down this score from 90 to 100 as being the walker's paradise. On the opposite side of the spectrum that they provide, they just call it car dependent. So 0 to 24, and then 20 to 25 to 49 is essentially car dependent. One thing that we were looking at is that we needed a means, again, a yardstick, to measure if we're improving walkability in an area. So if you provide an opportunity like next to a park, but you have to walk down a busy street that has no sidewalk, that is a barrier of access. In as much as like perhaps a high crime area could be a barrier for access between a park. So the origin of even safe routes to school is one of these things where the schools are being provided to the residents, but the children just did not have clean and easy access to the schools so they could walk. So being driven was the alternative, and that wasn't a good choice. Walkability Walker's Paradise, apparently, which is close to downtown. That's an expectation. How they're measuring this, this commercial company is they're looking at not just whether or not you have sidewalks. They're looking at if you have things to go to. So there's amenities, there's grocery stores. There's things that you'll want to go out and see and do, and they're close by. In addition to that, they do look at demographics, and they have we'll call it a black box because they don't share with us the exact code how they do it, but it's a repeatable function that they're doing, and they're doing it across the entire United States. So we like that factor of it. We've applied it to a hexagonal grid across the entire county, and in that grid, you can see these scoring values. So areas that logically you mentioned have amenities and they have residences score better. Areas that have perhaps just residences and no amenities score not as good. They're car dependent. Areas that have no residences also, interestingly, score poorly because, well, you don't live there. It's not walkable. So, I want to open walkability up to questions as well right now. Anyone has any?
Is there other organizations that give out walk scores?
There is. There's a number. Walk scoring and or walkability assessments. They're not a new concept. It's been done by planning departments all over. It's often measurements of intersection densities, things like that. There's a number of formulas, just none that we found where they're universally applied and repeatedly maintained. So, any other questions? One more question.
Yeah, just a quick question. So what's the kind of the end game on this? Because I do this sort of stuff all the time. I'm like geeking out pretty intensely right now on all this stuff. I love it. But I know that, is this to influence county land use decisions moving forward? Is this to sort of bring this to jurisdictions and help them understand sort of the before and this is sort of the existing conditions, right?
Sure.
So I guess
Truthfully, one of our core hopes with looking at walkability and looking at access to these spaces was being able to provide more and better information to the community members so that when they interact in a community setting, community meeting, and they want to influence their own neighborhoods, their own land use, that it helps level set part of the dialogue so that they're not saying, well, we don't have parks. And we can say, well, let's look what we have here. Walkability is terrible. Is it? I mean, maybe it is. And legitimately, the numbers set us free, and they get us out of the singular points that people may want to express in community settings that might be true for them, but not necessarily true for the entire community. So we're truly hoping that it helps provide a level set experience, a landscape of data, and that's what we can make a lot of our decisions on. Any other questions?
My question is, if you're going to measure factors among the community, my particular community has half residential, half commercial,
dense land use. So those factors also affect the way how the community behaves. So how do you measure those factors and put it to a button?
Sorry, go ahead.
So I don't know how the residents can be part of this decision making to show that there's walkability, because my community is walkable, but not necessarily encourage recreation.
Okay.
That's my question. So how do you measure and put that together to a larger community?
We bring up a really good point, which is, as you noticed, a lot of the community spaces and the definitions that we're using are largely focused on government, land use, government ownerships. And we did that because we can zone for a commercial area, we can zone for a grocery store, but we can't make a grocery store happen. We can zone for a Starbucks and hope it happens, and it would act as a focal point of the community, which commercial activity would then lead foot traffic, but we can't make it happen. So we can provide for the circumstances in which some of these things might enhance the walkability of an area, but the only things that we can truly control or influence is largely the public infrastructure that surrounds the recreation values. So when you lace in on top of that mosaic, that landscape, which is rich, the commercial opportunities, it just gets better looking at the transect and compatibility values of the land use as it is, as it relates to the community. So commercial will enrich the experience because the truth is that people don't just go to the park and they stop and they go to Trader Joe's and then they go to the park, or they go vice versa, you know, cool stuff. Yes?
Hi. Yeah, I have a question about relating this data to other data sets. So, do you have plans to perhaps be able to overlay this data set with the average age of people in each of these quadrants to see if we're serving our age well plan? Do we have a way to overlay for mode share? So if we're seeing a place that looks walkable on the map but people aren't walking, can we take a deeper dive and say what infrastructure improvements do we need to make to ensure that people are able to take advantage of that theoretical walkability? Can you talk a little bit about how this can relate to other data sets?
Good question. And one of the fundamental difficulties when dealing with mapped space and trying to categorize any kind of phenomenon, any kind of project description, is your mapping unit, right? What is it that we're comparing? If we go at a zip code level, well, that doesn't necessarily match up ideally with, say, the underlying demographics. If we're trying to describe something as broad scale as obesity, it's hard to tackle if you want to talk about the entire jurisdiction because you know where's the problem? You know, it's somewhere here. Okay? So one of the things that we chose in this process, it was a bit of a side effect, was we had come up with this, we'll call it a framework to assess these individual values, and that's what you see in these hexagonal grids. We wanted to choose a standard geography, a standard hexagonal geography associated with these values because then you could load up a similar set of cells with demography, with crime, with jobs, with a number of economic factors. And because the polygon areas are standard, it means for, I don't know, it's just like, let's go to the geek world now. It means the computer can process the comparison very fast rather than trying to compare different areas, different polygons, different sizes, and then you're trying to come up with like a rate over area assessment between disparate data sets. This holds constant multiple data sets to standard geographies. So if you say there's this many people in this area and they have this many things, whatever it may be, this much access or maybe this much crime, you overlay exactly the same data set. You talk about what is their access to food. You're dealing with a like-for-like comparison. Yes?
Along those same lines, just again, I think it's a very good point. One of the things I was looking at would be helpful is we talked earlier about barriers and things like that, and walkability. So you have Rosecrans on here, sort of a walker's paradise, but we all know from our experience that it's high ADT, wide streets, all those things. So I'm wondering if there's a possibility to overlay, even just as an overlay for that visual perspective, sort of an ADT or traffic volumes on that as a way to sort of mitigate, or I guess kind of ground truth it a little bit relative to the conditions on the ground.
You can, but then we'll run into, this is right back to the whole idea of a mapping unit.
Right.
If you exceed the scale of the intended use of your map, you start to do things where you make decisions based on information that's not really there. So we could get the right answers for the wrong reasons by loading up a bunch of data into the model and say like, I know that area so well, and so I'm going to move the results into the green because I'm there every day. Sure. What we will unfortunately set up for ourselves is essentially like a super powerful flashlight that shines correctly in certain areas and it's dark everywhere else. So we want to make certain that we're not loading a bunch of intention into a model and we're simply taking it for what it is. It's a regional partial assessment on access or walkability in a sense. And the key detail here is that we can go right back to the Walk Score company and buy another year's worth of data and then compare how we did from years previously. And that allows us to then gauge our access and then to answer the question which we mentioned in the beginning, how do we know if we've accomplished our goals? If in 5 years from now, the Walk Scores haven't improved, that is a sobering judgment upon us. With that, I'm going to be pulled off the stage. Thank you very much, Ross. That was really awesome. And I think that a couple of the
to introduce Dr. Sayam